Welcome back to Basin Motorsports for another week here in the garage. So it's been a couple weeks since I put anything out, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Not because I haven't been working on anything, but because everything's just kind of gone sideways. So in order to get you guys caught up to where I am today and how I'm going to finish this episode, we have to go back a month ago. So if you need a bathroom break or another beverage, cold, hot, whatever it is, put it on pause now, let it spool up, and we'll see you when you come back. All right, so how this all got started, we have to go back about a month ago. If you remember back in early February, Punxsutawney Phil said, hey, spring is on the way. Forget that whole 6 weeks thing. Spring is coming to you. What that actually turned into was a lot of snow. And for us, we don't usually get snow past the end point of February. Really, it starts to kind of hold steady on the weather, starts to melt everything off, and actually it turned into a bunch of snow. And I see up ahead, Nikki has grabbed the tractor. This is the one that we picked up a few weeks ago for my father-in-law, for Nikki's dad. She has got the blower going, and we are basically just going to cut down the road. We've got good tracks, and you can kind of see that we've got good wheel tracks in, but the center, unless you're really low enough to be dragging, it really doesn't get cleaned off. Now, the first little bit would have been fine. We can deal with that. But then after that, it turned into more snow. You know, you got really deep snow, that thing will throw snow 30 feet. And it is making a trail there. So at a certain point about 2 weeks ago, the snow has finally subsided. Thankfully, we can start getting around the farm and everything else. But what happens when all that snow melts and it gets to 50 to 60 degrees? It turns into water. And we've had a couple weeks of at least 50s to 60s, even mid-60s. And what happens to that snow and water? It turns into more water. So right now, thankfully, it has almost melted all the snow, but even today it's starting to snow again. So it's just going to be a wacky, wild spring, I guess, start to spring, which was a week ago, and who knows what it's going to be. Hopefully we're not going to be in a drought. The great thing is all that snow and all that water runs back to our hay meadow here on the property, which means we'll probably get some hay this year, which is awesome. Just get to cut our own, grow our own a little bit there, cut it, put it for the animals, means I have to buy less. That's not a bad deal. So outside of the weather, things at work have gotten a little bit crazy. So about 2 weeks ago, one of my colleagues left the position and went to a new company. What that meant was where I was working, that I had a little bit more free time to be out here in the garage during the day or anything else, meant that I'm now absolutely slammed at work. My workload went from pretty good, where I had some free time, to triple what it was, and pretty much I don't get that free time anymore. It'll subside. I just got to get in there, get some stuff done at work and that. So, which means all that time I had, if I had time to work in the garage or on weekends itself, now has turned into I need to be on doing farm chores and doing other stuff. So a lot of the car stuff has taken a lot longer. I haven't had the time to work on things. So that brings us back to the wide body. So I think the last thing I had done on it was that I was tinkering with vinyl wrap on the wheels. Shot that one night, kind of did it all, and then since then, I've changed a little bit how I'm going to do it. I know how I'm going to do it. I haven't had the time to get back to it. You've seen the Gray Lady. It got the heater core put in, the dash put back in, everything runs, starts. Just need to bleed the cooling system once I get a leak fixed. So it's sitting in a good spot. I could pull it out, and it's just in a good place at this point. It's a good stopping place. It's just going to sit until I get back to it. On the wide body, I think I had mentioned somewhere along the way that it had a leak at the timing cover, leaking coolant, it had a leak at the steering rack, and it also had a leak at the rear main seal. So I had this grand plan, which started I think 3 weeks ago, is where I was going to film all of this stuff separately and make 3 different videos. So you'd have one on replacing the steering rack, one on doing the timing chain cover, getting that all sealed back up, and then one doing the rear main seal. Oh, and doing a dash pad. So that would have been 4 different videos. What that has turned into is I didn't film most of it because I never had time or motivation to do it. But this is how it all started. Welcome back to Basin Motorsports for another intriguing weekly episode here in the garage. So in 2019, I plan to get the wide body out a lot more than I did last year. Plenty of driving to shows, trailering to shows, getting to shows, and lots more shows. So there's really kind of three things left that I want to do to get this thing ready to go. One is to fix the power steering leak that is somewhere in the rack. I need to also fix the coolant leak that's somewhere in the timing cover. And the third thing is I want to put a dash pad on this car to kind of finish off the interior. So today we're going to jump into the first one of those, which is to look at the power steering rack and figure out where that leak is coming from. All right, so showing you kind of looking here, this is the boot on the steering rack. Here's the rack itself right here. And where I'm getting a leak is down inside of this cavity where that shaft comes out. So you can kind of see that, I guess you call it whitish, white yellowish. That is the limiters. I need to add those. If you remember back, I talked about it in the coilover why I didn't, or why I needed more of those. I need to get some of those on order and those just snap over that shaft. But I'm having an oil leak. You can kind of see how much of all this is oily, and I'm getting oil, I think, blow by where that shaft comes through, down in there. I'm almost not even sure I can even replace that. Don't think I can. I don't think I can replace seal down in there. Alright, so it's dripping, definitely. You can see it's dripping out here and from there. So it's definitely coming out of this, coming out of that. Now I've got to decide, can I actually get a seal for that? Or is that a whole rack that just needs to be replaced? Welcome back to Basin Motorsports for another week here in the garage. Now, I mentioned last time there are 3 major things that I want to do on this vehicle, or the wide body, to get it ready for shows this year. 1 is going to be the power steering, 2 is going to be fixing the coolant leak, and 3 is the dash pad. So today we're going to work on number 2, which is going to be the timing cover leak on the wide body. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and run the car just to double check to make sure I know exactly where it's leaking at. I know where one leak is, but I want to make sure that it's not leaking in anywhere else so that I can order a gasket set to make sure I have everything before I start tearing this apart. Alright, so with the car running, you can definitely see right up in there having a leak. Yeah, right there at the timing cover. You can see it dripping off the oil pan right there. You can see it dripping. So that's definitely my leak, from the timing cover gasket to the block. Exactly where it's having an issue, right up there. Alright, so I did some research last night on the steering gear. I was trying to decide if I wanted to get a seal kit or just go ahead and get a whole complete rack and just replace it all. So the basic gist of it was the seal kits are like 20 bucks, the rack roughly 100. So you've got a difference of 80. Now you split up your time. Let's say it takes me 3 to 4 hours to reseal that thing, if I can even do it. It's basically going to be about the same cost. You're going to have to take it all apart anyway. And remember, the inner and outer tie rods off of this rack are 94 to 04. So if I replace with a 92 replacement rack, the inner and outer tie rods aren't going to work for the wide body. So I've got those taken off. You can see they're right here in a bag or a box. I've got it labeled with a P and a D, which is passenger and driver, so I don't mix them up side to side. And that way I don't have to actually adjust alignment either, since I've already done that. As long as they're put back on the same way, they will go right back on, and the alignment should be in the same place. So I've left everything there. The body of the steering gear is Still connected to the car. I've got the main attachment bolts loose. I just need to get the steering shaft off and then work on getting the lines out. It's already drained out. I pulled a line, let it all drain out, so that's good. I just now need to kind of get the ancillaries off of it, and that'll be it. We're jumping back into the coolant here. So you can see I've already got things taken apart. Now, unfortunately, the timing cover is essentially the front of the engine, so you've got to take everything off. So I disconnected the battery, took the alternator off, so you can see the line there is for the one-wire alternator going straight to the back. Still got the balancer and pulley off the crankshaft still on there, the timing pointer, but you can see that everything else is off. So the power steering is off to the side. It's drained because I'm also working on the steering gear at the same point. Then you can see I've got the water pump off, all the hoses off, and everything is pretty much drip dried through lunch. So now I need to work on getting the probably the crankshaft off, and I may end up pulling this radiator out just to give me a little more space on the front of the crank because it is drained. It's nothing really holding it on there. So take that off, and then we'll get to the other pieces. So that'll seem pretty straightforward, right? I got to the point where the steering gear is ready to come out. I got to the point where the engine was probably in good shape. Now I had planned to leave the engine in the car. I was going to drop the pan out, and I was just going to literally just raise the engine. So that way the steering gear could come out, the pan could go up over the K-member, and that's not what happened. If you've ever worked on a small block, you know the K-member and the engine are a really tight fit. The oil pan can be changed inside of there. But honestly, I just really didn't want the headache. And I couldn't do it with the engine in the car without dropping the transmission to get to the rear main seal. So I made the choice to pull the engine out. There's a lot of ways to do it. I could have pulled everything from behind the engine out and done it that way, and just literally lifted the engine up in the car. I ended up just literally just pulling it out. The good thing about that is that I found one bolt that had backed out from the time I put it in. That was going to be a bad thing if it fell out, so I will get that fixed. Shame on me for doing that. But the other thing was I got to see exactly how modular I had made this. So when I had designed it all up in my head and put it all in, the plan was that I could literally pull off all the connections, yank out the engine, and it would come out relatively easy without having to do a lot of stuff. The fact was that all worked as I had planned. Everything became pretty modular, and it all came out relatively easy. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, we're done. This is how the engine bay looks without the engine. K-member still in place. Everything else is kind of pulled up out of the way. Everything comes off and just kind of sits out of the way. No issues there. And the transmission just disconnected the T5 from the bell housing. Took the bell housing with it. Everything else is just kind of pulled up, slid out of the way. And everything else will drop right back in once I put the engine in there, connect right back up, and it should be okay. So that gets us to the engine. So this is, again, just the stock 92 5 liter that came out of the Rec 92, the Wild Strawberry one that I had built previously. Everything on here was original. So the gaskets have about somewhere in the 113 to 115,000 mile range. They got good life out of them, but you know, as gaskets do, they tend to fail a little bit. So I had already taken off the timing cover in the car, and I took loose the oil pan, and at that point I basically just put 2 bolts in the oil pan, picked it all up out, and set it out here. I've just got it connected up to the stand, which is the red bar right there. It's on an engine stand, and I've just left the hoist connected to it because I don't need anything on the top. It can just stay connected, makes it easy. I already changed the rear main seal on this, and it's pretty straightforward, but if you've never done one, there is one little trick I'll show you. So the new rear main seal is this brown. Now the old one will come out, you can pull it out of there and it will come out easy, but to put the new one in, if you don't loosen up this cap, this rod cap here, or this main cap, what tends to happen is you kind of smash this in there, and eventually over time it's going to leak. So in order to get this in and out easily, what you can do is you can take the 2 bolts out of this cap and it will fit very tight. Take it out, leave the Leave the bolts threaded in just a smidge so the cap doesn't fall off, but you can allow it to kind of come down a little bit. Tap it as you need to, maybe like a little plastic hammer or something like that. Tap it as you need to. It gets all the tension off of this. Take the old one out, put the new one in, and then put this cap back on. And I think these are like 24 foot-pounds, I think somewhere in there for those. Check your manual, and then put red Loctite on them. That way they don't back out. So that takes care of the rear main seal really easily. And then you can start moving on to the timing cover. So the timing cover itself is pretty easy to go onto. They oversize the gaskets because they make them for so many different small block Fords from like, I don't know, like 60s maybe up. They're all kind of the basic same. So you see that I've just left this gasket kind of big. And at this point, I'm really not worried. This is not the long-term engine, so I'm probably just going to leave it alone rather than go ahead and cut all this extra gasket off. You can do that if it bothers you. If it doesn't, just leave it alone. So at this point, I've already got the gasket on. I've already got the water pump back on, timing cover, dampers back on, pulley bolts. Everything's back on there. I've even thrown the alternator back on. Now, again, this is just a one-wired, I'm not even sure if it's a GM or whatever, but this came from Summit. That's what the last owner told me. Stock tensioner, everything there is pretty easy to go back on other than the power steering, which I'll do in the car. Now, I went and just got the Felpro kit for the timing cover, which also comes with extra pieces. So this would be the front main seal. If I wasn't replacing the oil pan with a one piece, you could reuse this. Those two there pieces are the corner of the oil pan. And then you've got a different style water pump that you could use. Again, it's a lot of different model years, so you could just do that. And then if you were using not an EFI, not a fuel injected, but like a manual pump, fuel pump that goes on the side of the timing cover, that would go there. Those are not going to be used because I'm going with a one-piece oil pan gasket, which is this. New steering rack is right there. I haven't put that on. And then you can kind of see the bell housing I will put back on, starter. Still got to clean up a little bit of oil down in here. And then I'm just draining out my coolant there to be reused. Just practically brand new. It's only got a couple hundred miles on it. And then you can see back there, just more junk. So I had a little more time and I was able to get the pan gasket put on before the end of last night. Now these are only going to be, these bolts here are the fasteners for the oil pan. It's only going to be about 11 foot-pounds, so pretty easy to strip those and go crazy if you tried. So I just used a torque wrench on that. Now this is a one-piece continuous, and the only thing they recommend really is to put a little silicone right there where those meet. So I did that, and everything else looks pretty good all the way around. Now the Felpro comes with what it's called a perma-dry. Don't have to use silicone. They say, you know, it's up to you. I put a little dab on there, but everything else is good. So I shouldn't say I expect, that jinxes it. I hope there's going to be no more leaks from the rear of the engine now between a new main seal and a new oil pan, plus the front timing stuff. So there's the new steering rack in. Now the difference, this is just a simple replacement, so it doesn't have a breather tube between the rubber boots on each end, but it does look nice and shiny. Now, one thing I'll note is I had told you I needed to put in some more spacers. So you can see right here, that is 2 of the steering lock spacers. Now this rack itself is listed for the Performance Series or Endurance, whatever you want to call it. Basically means it's 2.5 turns lock to lock without the inhibitors or the pieces here, without these. So now, with the extra wide tires, I showed you previously why I don't run coilover suspension, if you remember that video, that they would touch the sway bar. With 2 of those spacers in there, just like there, they actually don't hit. So that is lock to lock. And probably, well, it's probably a good finger's width on each side between the tire and the sway bar. I'll double check that when it's all back under suspension and everything else. And luckily it's not very hard to change. You just basically take off this screw clamp right there and the clamp on the boot and just slide that out and then put your pieces in there. So at this point, all it really needs to be now is to put the boots back on the ends of the steering rods or tie rods, whatever you want to call them. Get the engine stand off the engine so it's dangling from the hoist so I can get to the back. Put the flywheel on, put the clutch disc pressure plate on, and the bell housing and starter. Get all that stuff back on, and that is simply just a matter of reassembly. Torquing it all using the red Loctite on the flywheel, blue on the clutch plate itself. Since those are high rotational things, you don't want those backing out at all. And then getting the bell housing on. All that stuff has already been done. I've already done it previously when I did the new clutch plate and everything else. And it's just a matter of time and energy at this point before I drop this motor back in. All right, with a few more hours worth of work, the engine is back in. And I'll tell you, it was almost kind of scary because it went in exactly like I thought it should. When I kind of wire tucked this all and everything else, the key thing I was looking for is what I'm going to call modularity. And really it means that you undo a few connections, like I did, undid all the harness, motor mounts, transmission, bell housing and that, and the engine really just came straight up and out. Going back in was really just a reversal of taking it out. So the engine went back in. I laid down there to make sure that the input shaft from the transmission went right back in the clutch and right back into the engine. My wife ran the hoist for me, kind of just talking it through, up, down, a little bit forward, a little bit backward, and everything went right in. So now everything is bolted in. I've got fluids in it. It's time to turn that key and to see if this thing is actually going to fire right up and have any leaks. So fingers crossed, this thing is going to fire right up. Well, after about 15 minutes of running, I'm happy to report the only problem is I got a little chatter where it sounds like the pilot bearing to the input shaft, maybe something like that. You can take it, you can slide the clutch fork forward and it gets rid of it. So it's a little bit there, a little bit of chatter in that. If I had an adjustable quadrant, I could probably tune that out a little bit. But otherwise, it's there. There are no leaks that I found yet, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that after it cools down, it doesn't start leaking anywhere. No coolant leaks, no fuel, no oil, nothing. There wasn't a drop underneath this car after running. So, happy with that. It idles about 900 RPM once the computer all stabilized. I've got the idle turned up just a little bit to get a little bit of that surging hesitation, but I will take a little higher idle than what it should be just to get rid of that surging and make it just idle and purr. So at this point, it is back. It's close to ready. I need to permanently connect my fan back up. It's got heat inside, which is fantastic. Now I just need to kind of get it ready so that I can turn the heat off, because I won't need it eventually come July. But I've got coolant cycling through everything. I will top it off once it's all cooled down, and guys, it's ready to go. It's ready to party. So this has been like 3 weeks of work, and I'm not even sure how long the video is going to be, but just know once I get the hood back on and everything else adjusted, fluids topped off, this baby's ready to go, and I am going to try my best to put some serious miles on it. So if you wonder where I've been, now you know, and you know that the WideFox is ready to party. With that, we'll see you next time.